back. The House Ethics Committee is expected to meet today to discuss next steps after it previously declined to release its report on former Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Democratic Congressman Sean Casten of Illinois is looking to force a vote to release the years-long investigation into accusations against Gaetz. Those claims involve sex with a minor and illicit drug use. Gaetz, who was Donald Trump's pick to be Attorney General before withdrawing his nomination, has denied all wrongdoing. He's also resigned from Congress. Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst Juanita Tolliver. Juanita, good to see you. Let's talk about this debate here. Why do you suppose Congressman Casten has deemed it so important to release this report? And what big picture can this tell us, perhaps, about the state of the Republican Party and who Donald Trump had wished to put in power?
All right, I think that big picture moment is a key motivation for Representative Casten as he continues to push for this resolution that he wants to bring to the House floor for a vote to release this report. I think he's also motivated by the tensions that have been previously reported from the House Ethics Committee, which, let's remember the context of the ending of their last meeting and their last vote on this, after which the report was not released. Representative Gaetz said there was a consensus to not release the report, and Representative Susan Wild, a Democrat, felt the need to call him out for that. She called it a betrayal of the process. Knowing that they're going back in that meeting today, I think Representative Casten is trying to apply pressure again to the Ethics Committee to release this report, because in his mind, it's something that needs to be discussed, as this is who Donald Trump wanted to lead the DOJ, as well as the reality that Gaetz may have future political aspirations. I do appreciate you mentioning that this is a years-long investigation, because this has been something that the House Ethics Committee has been probing for 3 years, and it extends to include questions about bribery or acceptance of gifts, as well as misuse of campaign funds. And so one of the other key themes that Casten has been emphasizing is standards within Congress and what members of Congress are expected to do as leaders and representatives in this country, and whether or not that standard is something that the Republicans believe should be upheld, as well as emphasized in whatever is included in this report that prompted Matt Gaetz to exit Congress as abruptly as he did last month.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It's an effort to try to restore and enforce some sort of norms, some sort of guidelines, when Donald Trump, of course, tries to barrel through most of them. So on that same idea, Juanita, give us your read here on, look, Trump, he won. He won the popular vote this time around as well. Republicans control both houses of Congress. So there's a sense he walks the door with a lot of momentum. He'd be unstoppable. But we are seeing Republican senators stand up to him, at least a little bit. John Thune, majority leader. We saw them, they pushed back on the Gaetz pick. Gaetz had to give it up. We're now seeing a lot of resistance to Pete Hegseth as well. Are you reading in, should there be signs of hope here that Republican senators and just the institution of the Senate are willing to do their part?
I mean, I think the Gaetz situation was uniquely interesting because he had minimal friends on Capitol Hill. He'd ruffled a lot of feathers over the years and had a lot of people who were not supportive of him generally. So I think his ouster was different from what we're seeing with Hegseth. And so it remains to be seen if Republican senators are going to stand up to Donald Trump or some of these highly unqualified candidates he's putting up as nominees for key cabinet positions. The other reality is on Capitol Hill, especially in the House of Representatives, Republicans are working with a minuscule margin of leadership here. And so when you consider that they can only afford to lose potentially one vote in the next Congress to get anything done, I think it reemphasizes the fact that, yes, Donald Trump won the election. Yes, Republicans won the House, but they do not have a mandate from the nation, especially as it applies to different agenda items, whether that's repealing the Affordable Care Act or gutting government funding, which Trump would need Congress to approve in terms of his government efficiency agenda, as he so calls it. And so that margin, I think, is something that'll also come into play when he tries to influence Congress, as well as when members of Congress, especially Democrats, potentially make their own demands. I'm looking at House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, especially in that moment when Republicans at some point are going to have to come to House Democrats for support on a range of issues, whether that's funding the government or anything else.
Yeah, no question there, particularly considering how tiny the Republicans' margin is in the House.